Speaking of Aaron Rodgers, the Jets are going to Arizona, 4:25 on Sunday.
Look at that, just seamless.
The Jets are favored by 1.5 here against the Cardinals. Second straight week, the Jets are favored against a team with a winning record. 3-6 Jets against the 5-4 Arizona Cardinals. Are the Jets back?
Are they back? Based off
every week,
the win.
Is Texas back? Are the Jets back? Their entire offensive line for the Jets, literally the entire offensive line, is on the injury report.
That's not ideal.
Left tackle Tyron Smith, left guard John Simpson, I guess Jake Hansen. 4 out of 5. Elijah Vera-Tucker, Morgan Moses, all did not participate on Wednesday. I think they're expecting the 2 tackles to play.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens there, though.
I mean, the offensive line is a potential problem for them. Really, this game strikes me as a well-coached team against a not well-coached team. And that might be doing it too. Maybe discipline is the better way of describing it, like a disciplined team against an ill-disciplined team. I think ultimately, when you're trying to articulate why the Jets season hasn't gone the way people wanted it to or expected it to, I think it really comes down to that, like discipline. Everyone's making mistakes, and it's not at the same time necessarily, but somewhere along the line, somebody is making a mistake on any given play. And each game, you can kind of point to these little bits and pieces, and it's the details, and I think it all ends up falling into the category of just a lack of discipline across the board. Whereas Arizona, I think you can sum up a lot of why they've been a better team than they were expected to be, because they've been pretty disciplined. They don't make a ton of mistakes. They are, generally speaking, overachieving because they're simply not screwing a ton of things up. So I think that is the kind of defining characteristic of the Jets in particular. And whilst I think that they've been close to a lot of wins and are quite close to being able to go on a run and beating teams, it does rely on stopping making mistakes, which they haven't shown an ability to do, not just this season, but like for years now.
Yeah, I mean, if Rodgers didn't listen, Garrett Wilson saved their season. The Rodgers 3rd and 18, you look at it 2 ways. Rodgers makes the decision to throw a prayer, basically. Yeah. But it was a prayer, right? It was literally a jump ball, which is, we call 50-50, which is really 20-80 in reality. And Garrett Wilson turns it into a one-handed, incredible catch of the year, saving their season, essentially. 2 one-handed catches saving their season. Those things overcame roughing the punter on 4th and 21, overcame the kill the long snapper penalty that almost gave the Texans
should have put more points on the board.
And the Jets made a nice goal line stand after that. But as you're saying, there's special teams mistakes, there's just general mistakes on both sides. I mean, in all phases for the Jets, that the potential special players, the Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilsons, Devonte Adams of the world have to overcome.
Yeah.
And if they're capable of overcoming them. The other thing I'll say is, historically, we've seen, we just saw this recently. You get a new receiver in town. It doesn't show up in the first game necessarily. This goes back to Brady getting Antonio Brown and Stafford getting OBJ, and now Mahomes getting DeAndre Hopkins and Rodgers getting Davante Adams. Game 2, we see DeAndre Hopkins with 2 touchdowns. We see Davante Adams find the end zone. Like, you start to get the groove back. And if the groove is back with the Jets and Rodgers and Davante Adams and Rodgers and Garrett Wilson, that's dangerous, man. Because Rodgers throwing the ball is better, right? He is better. But the thing I'll say about the Jets, and throw for throw, I think Rodgers is fine. There's still something missing about this offense. The easy button is missing from this offense. The reason why Rodgers won 2 MVPs late in his career with the Packers is I think Matt LaFleur opened up the easy button to go with what Rodgers is still capable of, is making those tight window throws and making the back shoulder and putting the ball in his guys' hands, in really tight coverage. Rodgers can still do that. But Matt LaFleur opened up the easy button, wide open touchdowns, scheme plays, more motion, just beating the defense. The Jets still don't have that. So I think we're getting into this world where the margin for error is still really thin. And if Garrett Wilson makes great one-handed catches and Rodgers puts the ball right on Davante Adams' hands on a slot fade, they're good, they're fine, but it's just they've created this really fine margin for error where Rodgers and those playmakers, I think, have to be special, and the easy button's missing from this offense.
It is, but I do think that you're right, that the arrival of Davante Adams makes them so much harder to defend, because now you've got one threat on either side of the line. and they're both devastating, and you can't cheat in one direction, right? If you cheat the safety, if you try and bracket Davante Adams, Garrett Wilson is one-on-one and he can feast on that coverage, right? So it's really difficult now. Teams effectively have to make a choice. Do we specifically target one of these guys and run the risk that the other guy runs riot, or do we play it honestly down the middle and kind of cheat and back off and not really cover either of them? And now they both got space. So that arrival, and we saw that it's going to have, I think, a compounding effect and a bigger effect the longer we go. But you saw that week one. Davante Adams arrived. He didn't have a huge impact, but Garrett Wilson did. The second Adams arrived, Wilson sparked and looked a lot better. So that offense is a lot more difficult to cover. And, okay, the Texans game is weird because, remember, the first half, nothing happened for the Jets. They had, like, Rodgers had 30 passing yards or whatever. Yep. And they were a bunch of individual plays away from, I mean, it was an 8-point win, but it could have easily been a Texans win, right? That freakish sequence down by the field goal thing where they had 3 points, took it off the board, went for the touchdown, settled for a 27-yard field goal after the Jets held, and then missed it. They went, a whole bunch of things had to happen, and yet they end up and it was like, oh, it's an 8-point win, comfortable. But they are, I think, a lot more difficult to stop than they were a few weeks ago on offense.
No, I agree. They have more options. Other side of the ball, I was so impressed with Arizona's run game. I thought this was the first game that
I can talk about James Conner.
Insert your James Conner take. The whole run game was outstanding by Arizona. Their offensive line was very good. I still don't trust the Jets against the run this year. And when we talk about things that have regressed for the Jets, defense generally, but run defense in particular, has not been nearly as good. Teams can run on them, and I think Arizona added that element last week between the line, James Conner, and every week I'll say if the great Kyler shows up, much like great Stafford with the Lions, great Russell Wilson with the Seahawks, it showed up 3 to 5 times a year where they looked unstoppable. If that Kyler shows up, man, Arizona's tough to beat.
Yeah. Going back to the running back thing, I mean, James Conner is fantastic. The other side, though, Breece Hall. So the Jets generally, I think, perception doesn't quite match reality in terms of how everybody's performing because it's like a sort of collection of mistakes that often show up. Like, there's a lot of people who are under the impression like Tyron Smith's having a terrible season at left tackle. And really it's because he's had like 1 or 2 bad games. Yeah. Overall, Tyron Smith has actually played fine. And that's kind of the story for every segment of the Jets. Like, oh, this is playing terribly, and really none of it is. It's just that occasionally, either for a bad play at a bad time or in a bad game, but overall it's just like a slight regression across the board. The one area, though, where I think it is true, Breece Hall is not having a good season at all, individually. And the offensive line hasn't been great, like the run blocking has not been amazing. That hasn't mattered in the past for Breece Hall. He's been one of those guys that has been able to overcome not great blocking. Breece Hall has been not good this year. Doesn't look like the same guy at all. I was on a Jets podcast yesterday. They were bringing up all the next-gen stats, miles per hour numbers. Like Breece Hall's numbers are for speed, just explosiveness are way down across the board. Like he's visibly not the same player.
Is that because he just hasn't had the long run?
No, because he's had at least one.
He did have a couple.
Right, and that one was like 1.5 miles slower than his general. Like numbers of sort of 15 mile per hour numbers are down. The top end is down. Like and that kind of matches up with the eye test where he just doesn't look as explosive as he's had in the last couple of seasons. His PFF grade is way down relative to previous seasons. Yeah, and right now he's kind of being outperformed by Braylon Allen. But he's not been the player that they need him to be.
All right, man, let's make some picks here. We talk about the Cardinals enough? I'm impressed by the Cardinals. I'm impressed by Jonathan Gannon and the job that he's done. And I want to see that consistency week to week also from Kyler, Marvin Harrison Jr. I just want to see that consistency.
I'll be interested to see if Baron Browning can make an impact for them. Remember, Browning had this like all-time month a couple of years ago where he looked like the best young pass rusher in the NFL, and then that kind of disappeared. And it almost seemed like he was being sort of asked to do different things from that point on. Like they almost transitioned him into a run defender more than a pass rusher. Certainly in the Arizona locker room when he's being interviewed, he's been talking about, I can get after the quarterback, I can create pressure.
Arizona needs a one-on-one winner.
Yeah,
for sure.
They desperately need that. So I'm curious to see what he looks like in this new environment and in a new role, presumably. I mean, they're crying out for somebody that can make an impact as a pass rusher.
All right, man. Where are you going with this one?
I'm going to go with Arizona. I believe that discipline thing. They are a more disciplined football team at the moment, and I think that will work.
All right. I'm also taking Arizona. Harry's taking Arizona. This might be the only time I've taken the Cardinals all season.
Well, now, yeah.
Don't let me down.
This is exactly how they get you, right?
This is how they
Last
get you.
week, it's like there's no way they string together 3 consecutive good performances, and they do. Now we finally go, okay, fine. Now I believe, and they'll let you down.
As home underdogs. Last thing. I know we're over time here. The Jets, you've mentioned there's a path for them to bounce back. Quick. Cardinals, Colts, bye. Seahawks, Dolphins, Jaguars, Rams. That's their next slew of games. They're probably favored in every game, right? Against Seattle.
Rams.
If they're favored against the Cardinals, they're favored against the Texans and Cardinals back-to-back weeks. Colts, Seahawks, Dolphins, Jaguars, Rams. Then they play Buffalo and Miami. But like their next 5 or 6 games, I think they're favored.
Yeah.
They're 3-6. If they play to their expected ability, they're right back in this playoff mix. That's why it's not really over for the Jets.
And so there's a sort of tier forming, like the top 5, maybe 6 spots in the AFC are taking care of themselves, but that 7th wildcard spot is going to be winnable for a team that's not got a good record right now.
Absolutely.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.